Hi, hello, welcome everyone to fire season. I'm Chelsea Anderson, Public Programs Specialist here at the Getty Research Institute. I would like to begin by recognizing that the Getty Research Institute acknowledges our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongan peoples. We pay our respects to these groups, past, present, and emerging. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the speakers this evening. Francesca Gabbiani is a Los Angeles-based artist. Her work is included among public collections at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and the Museum of Contemporary Art here in Los Angeles. In her work, Francesca utilizes dense layers of intricately hand-cut paper to depict charged realms and landscapes. These non-spaces contemplate where nature and urbanization collide. Joining her in conversation this evening is Catherine Taft, an art critic, curator, writer, and deputy director of LAX Art. She's a regular contributor to Art Forum magazine and teaches in the Graduate Art Department of Art Center College of Design. Catherine is currently working on an exhibition and publication examining 4 decades of ecofeminist art, for which she received a research fellowship from the Andy Warhol Foundation of the Visual Arts. The program today will screen Francesca's film, Sea of Fire, which addresses her interest in the actions of climate change and the theories of ecofeminism through a spider's transformational journey through fire-damaged California landscapes. The title of the film is inspired by the fictional religion of Earthseed, based on the idea that God is change, as depicted in Octavia Butler's 1993 novel, Parable of the Sower. The film was also importantly informed by Donna Haraway's 2016 piece, Staying with the Trouble. In this work, Haraway encourages creating generative joy and collective thinking to stay with the trouble of our cyclical habitation on a damaged Earth. She depicts a spider as a model for how we might face ecological ruin together. She writes, "Nobody lives everywhere, everybody lives somewhere. Nothing is connected to everything, everything is connected to something. This spider is in place, has a place, and yet is named for intriguing travels elsewhere." The protagonist spider in Francesca's film references Haraway's spider and also harkens to the spinner of our destinies, familiar in folklore and Greek mythology, a feminine being weaving her web throughout the film. And you might notice the Getty Center about halfway through. Following the screening, Francesca will be joined in conversation by Catherine. Together, they will discuss how anxieties of environmental change have informed Francesca's art-making practices through the lens of a spiritual reconnection to nature. Their conversation today will address the tenets of ecofeminism and the ways artists have mined the intersections of gender and nature over time. From there, we'll open up the conversation to Q&A, and we invite you all to use the microphones at the front here to submit any questions. This program will be recorded and posted to the GRI's YouTube channel, along with many past programs. We invite you to visit and explore. Lastly, I'd like to thank Getty staff Adrian Cazares, my counterpart, Thisbe Gensler, and our audiovisual techs Clark Betty and Andrew Wiegert for their fantastic support of this program. Now, please join me in starting the show.
Hi, thank you all for being here. And thank you, Francesca and Chelsea and the team here at the Getty for inviting me to speak with you about your incredible work. I think you were just saying this is 2022, this piece, so really a kind of fresh work for you and an incredible extension of your studio practice. I think, the kind of work you've been making for decades, collage, painting-based work dealing with fire, with the Los Angeles landscape, surfers, water. I wondered if maybe we could start just by you telling us a bit about your process for the film and kind of how it connects to these themes that have been recurring for you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I think there's a lot of different possibilities in my studio that I see when I make a piece. A wash here, a cutout there. I could make it this way or that way or that way. So before I decide to freeze it on paper, maybe I decided that I can maybe film it, the different possibility. The landscapes that I saw when I first moved here were quite fascinating for me, and I think that's how I started to do all those Californian landscapes.
And if it's all right, I hope, maybe we could just move through a few of your works and images just to kind of give a sense of range, but really looking at these incredible fire scenes that you've so intricately made with collage and cutout. And really just for you, can you talk a bit about fire and specifically your experience with literal fires, because there have been many, as well as the kind of metaphorical meaning it has for you?
Yeah. I feel that landscapes have become spectacles in front of our eyes, and their tension are palpable and their narrative powerful. And all of this information that is given, that I feel so strongly, I try to find a way to convey it on the paper that is my canvas. Yeah, I do a lot of hikes. I'm also very fascinated by the history of Californian landscapes that deal with the sublime and the fear of this new world where you only see people very, very small and grandiose things. So that also was a lot of influence on my work.
And I think, speaking kind of your literal experiences that you bring to these works, you were kind of first-hand witness to the Woolsey fire, the Getty fire. And Woolsey fire is 2018, I think Getty fire 2020.
The Griffith Park, when I first moved here in the early 2000s, I was teaching at the Armory Center for the Arts. So I would take very young students to Eaton Canyon, and we would do art outside, talk about nature. Often we had natives that would teach us about nature as well. And I just remember one day, the sky turned gray, the sun turned orange, it looked really eerie. There was no smell, because this is the thing with fires here. If the wind blows the other way, you will see this science fiction landscape, but you won't smell anything. But then we kind of had to take the kids out and leave pretty fast. And I also remember seeing Griffith Park on fire. That was 2007, I think. I remember we lived in Silver Lake across from the park, and my very young children were looking at the fire. We were all looking at the fire. It was pretty dramatic. It was also incredible to go walk around there right after. It was a landscape of gray and ashes everywhere. I felt like I was literally in Lord of the Rings, Mordor, and I'd never seen anything like that. I did that on the Malibu Canyon also after the Woolsey fire. I went to walk there, I had the same feeling. And then this other thing happened with the landscape. Right after, you see, if you go like even just a few weeks after the fire, plants are starting to regrow. And because of the ashes making the soil more fertile, I think, the color of the landscape is fluorescent, like green and yellows, like in the middle of Mordor, is really incredible. Yeah, so the resilience is there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, it's no mistake that part of the reason you've experienced so many fires is that the landscape we all live in here in Southern California is victim to climate change and to the kind of policies that eradicated the controlled burning that native populations really took on as stewards of the land, and using fire as a way to kind of regenerate the earth and as you say, create rich soil for plants to grow in, and sustaining ecosystems and life. And a lot of that was eradicated, forbidden, made illegal in the late
1800s,
Yeah.
like 1850, I think, very early on in the Californian legislature, the tribes were forbidden to use controlled fire. So this is something, I was just looking at Raoul Peck destroy all the brutes. And he really talks about how the past doesn't stain the past. The past is here with us today. And of course, he talks about Haiti and he talks about racism, but you can see that in the landscapes and in the damaged lands that we have inherited from those decisions. And not just those decisions, but a lot others. So we have to learn how to live with that. And I think that's where you were talking about Donna Haraway, and she's like, there's rage, but there's also joy, and we need to keep that a little bit to keep it going.
And your film, I think, does a beautiful job of showing that arc in such a kind of economic way that we move from the kind of fear and the fire and the animals fleeing and almost a demon-like figure kind of moving through the scene. But we follow the spider through that tunnel of fire and into water and towards water, and kind of she morphs into the surfette,
Yeah.
as you say. I mean, could you talk a little bit about that connection and about the kind of the meeting of fire and water and what that sort of signifies to you?
The meaning of fire, well, I think that when there's a fire, what do? We go to the water. But that's also another very powerful element of our nature. The ocean here is not like the Mediterranean Ocean. It is very fierce. It's something you need to learn from as well. But it's true that when there's a fire, you first, and the fire does the same route. Humans will go to the water, but the fire usually moves east to west as well. Yeah, so you try to find refuge by the water. And I think I saw this during the lockdown. I was lucky enough to be by the water, and I saw this woman surfing, and it looked to me like she had such a different way of surfing than a lot of men. And I talked with my girlfriends who do a lot of surf too, and it's a little bit different when women are in the water. There's not maybe a little bit less of like, I'm gonna snake you, you're gonna snake me, I'm gonna go faster. No, I'm going faster. Maybe, and when I saw her, I was very mesmerized because she was surfing with no fins, and so she was doing this kind of very beautiful ballet. And that's when I was like, maybe that's how my spider should transform to continue her journey. Or to go into hope, maybe, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And and before we go to the spider, I think it's important to show this piece of yours of women firefighters. And you sort of had some firsthand interaction with them and saw them working. And certainly your work with journalist Dana Goodyear put you not only as an observer of the burning landscapes, like so many of us are, but really put you on the other side of the evacuation line to kind of go into these areas.
Yeah, so that's something that she was like, okay, I'll take you, let's go, and the women firefighter here, and I think for a while they were, you know, there's men inmates firefighters too. They work all day. They know everything about nature. They know what to cut, what to keep, how to be on the front lines. They take enormous risks. And then first of all, they're paid hardly anything, maybe $1 per day, if even. And then for the longest time, they were not even able to become firefighters once they would get out of jail. So, but I think now they can. But it was also very difficult. I made this piece and I was like, I want to auction this piece and give the money to a prison that has inmate women firefighters. This was very difficult to do, impossible to do. I still haven't been able to do it. But I just wanted to honor the hard work and the knowledge that they have that needs to be utilized as much as we can, because we really need that. Because those fires are so, they're not even big fires, they're mega fires, so you can't really control them so much. It's difficult, yeah. So they do big work, yeah.
And I mean, these fires also bring up the question of, you know, where should humans be living? Should we be even living in these areas? Should we be rebuilding in these areas? And you, in speaking with some of these firefighters, I think.
Yeah, so the firefighters were like, you know, I mean, the whole city is not built properly. We should not have houses up in the hills. We should only have houses, you know, in the valleys close to the water, but never up there in the mountains. That makes the landscape even more vulnerable to fires. And yeah, but mostly the controlled fire practice should be. Right. We cannot even do it because there's too many inhabitations. Maybe there's other things that come in the way of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we see some of that aftermath of these fires in the film as well. You know, these areas. I think it was from the Pacific Palisades Getty fire where you got to go see a lot of these burnt modernist houses, and of course the Halloween decorations were surviving. And
yeah. So the Crestwood fire was this community that was created in the 50s, and it was these Jewish immigrants that created a whole community with their schools, their doctors, their everything. So there was a lot of older folks living. They made those, you know, modernist, beautiful houses, and a lot of them burned down to the ground. And because the fire was right around Halloween, they all had those Halloween decoration that I filmed and then used. There was also the car that had the tar on top of it instead of on the road. Yeah. So it was pretty intense to see that.
And of course, you had access to that through your friendship
through
with
Dana. Yeah.
And you've worked with her before. You've, I think, contributed some. Here, we'll come back to these, but some work for her book covers, for podcasts she's done.
Yeah. So this is a piece that I made for her second podcast, Lost Hills. where she also revisits a murder that happened in Malibu in the 70s. And so I went with the detectives and the whole crew to the scene, and I just kind of listened to what happened and listen. There was a lot of history going of what happened and what people were thinking, and I just really needed to absorb all this to make this piece. I just wanted to make the piece for the kid that drowned with his mom. That was important for me, to give him a restful place to be after all this time. Yeah.
So, all this fire kind of has brought us to the ocean and to the sea, and I hope it's okay to mention that you are a surfer as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a very amateur surfer.
But yeah, I'm just thinking about these two sites, and the site of the ocean where your spider transforms into woman, and the connection of spiders and women. And I think there's a lot to be said there, and certainly Octavia Butler is a kind of an important figure as well in all of this.
Yes, so the spider, in Greek mythology, the spider is the weaver of our destinies. And I felt like the spider was weaving the little narrative of the film throughout skateboarding and going from one place to the other. So to me, she's a feminine being. In ancient traditions, women were the weavers of memories. So they would do the domestic work, and they would tell stories and keep traditions alive and transmit one story from one generation to the other. And there's another interesting thing about this, is that they had their gossip, but their gossip was the group of women that were there, and they were all talking and telling stories. And you can see how even that word was transformed into something not so flattering. Now you talk about gossip, it's a bad thing, but it wasn't. That's not the etymology of the word.
Yeah, sure. Sort of the origins being women sharing knowledge.
Yeah.
And I think also it's important to note that in a lot of Native American traditions, Spider Woman or Grandmother Spider are kind of these figures that bring the world into being. They're kind of earth goddesses in a way. And so I think that's all in here as well. You were mentioning earlier that Picasso was really arachnophobic, which I loved, was an artist like Louise Bourgeois and yourself really embraced the spider as this feminine figure or symbol. I think there's also that kind of fear there too, and fear of the woman, fear of the knowledge. And it's all there. But I have this picture of Octavia Butler, whose 1993 book, as Chelsea mentioned, Parable of the Sower, I think was really inspirational for you, and the title, Sea of Fire.
Yeah, so she, the book became a bestseller in 2020, but it's an extraordinary book. All happening in Los Angeles. There's fires everywhere. People are taking this drug called pyro, and they have orgasms when they set things on fire. And so people are living in small community, growing their own vegetable, homeschooling. So very similar of not exactly, but similarities with when we were in lockdown. But there's also this beautiful religion in the book that's called Earth Seed. And the religion just says that all that you touch is you change, and all that you change changes you. And the only lasting truth is change. God is change. And it's called Earth Seed. So the seed is also something that's always in movement. It's never staying a seed. It's like it grows, there's roots, you know. And we were looking together at this incredible book by Ursula Schultz-Dorman, who took photos of different wheat seeds, and it's incredible. Maybe we have a photo of that. It's
yeah,
like
we do. We can skip ahead and share. This incredible book has just entered the collection here at the Getty Research Institute. So if anyone's interested, it's there. You can access it. But here she's documenting, I think, every species of wheat grain, and you see how kind of bodily this figure is, how feminine and how kind of ingrained this knowledge is. Exactly. And I also wanted to share images, these stills from a film by Jumana Mana, Palestinian-American artist who did an incredible film about seeds that were salvaged from Aleppo during conflict times, taken to Norway into the seed bank in Svalbard, kind of deep under the earth. And then when the kind of seed research center needed to move to Lebanon, they took the seeds out of the seed bank and replanted them in Lebanon. So this kind of circuit of, from the Middle East to the north, kind of circuit of seeds moving and knowledge being shared. And of course, it's the women who are picking the seeds in this great film.
It's the women who are picking the seeds and who are telling the story of the seeds too. So the storytelling is important, and it's a tradition that still exists.
Yes.
And
yeah, so I think jumping back to the spider and kind of weaving stories and storytelling, we also spoke a lot about Donna Haraway, who, if many of you may know, was the writer of the Cyborg Manifesto in the early 1980s. And since then, I think has done a lot of work, almost revisionist work on her own theories, and really kind of conceiving of a new way to make kin with nature and to really make families with animals, species, plants, fungi. This is a still from a documentary about her work. And of course, she calls the moment we're living in the Cthulhucene. And of course, H.P. Lovecraft, it was a sci-fi writer who kind of wrote these awful stories about monsters, but one of them was the Cthulhu, which, she's not thinking about Lovecraft, but here on the spider's back is this kind of monster face. And she's specifically looking at this species of spider as a model for survival and a model for kind of how we could live in the 21st century, what she calls the Cthulhucene.
yeah, she has a few demons in the book that accompany her throughout her thesis. And this native Californian spider shows her the way home. So she's an important part of her storytelling. She talks about Chelsea mentioned that, but nothing connects to everything, but everything is connected to something, and we have to have this tentacular thinking. We have to express our anger, but also express our joy and stay with the time we're in. And she talks about SF as like science fiction. She talks about string figures connected to that you make with strings. And then there's a few other SF.
Speculative futures.
Yeah.
I think she calls
Science fiction.
calls on us to, in contexts like this, to really kind of think of our own ways to create new worlds. So worlding, she calls it, and she has so many great quotes. And I really recommend her new book, Making Kin with the Cthulhu, or it's Staying with the Trouble, Making Kin with the Cthulhucene.
Yeah.
And of course, this
is a documentary too.
Yeah, we can go back to it there. So from Pomoa Cthulhu, I propose a name for an elsewhere and an elsewhen that was, still is, and might yet be, the Cthulhucene. So, I think a lot of climate scientists talk about the Anthropocene as being the moment we're living in, where Earth is really changed by human interaction, by our extractive processes, There are also theorists who talk about the capitalist scene, really capitalism being the thing that is driving this historical epic. And here Haraway proposes the Cthulhu scene, which is sort of modeled after this spider that also survives fires. You know, it lives in redwood. Yeah, it lives in redwood forests and is kind of adaptable to fire. And so I think you've really taken that and run with it in your film in a really lovely way.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's your spider and riding the skateboard that is a coffin, I think. Yeah. And back to your water. Beautiful pictures.
We could talk a little bit about your show that you're...
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to share a few examples of other ecofeminist artworks. I mean, I think there's so much work to be done, and it's such a huge concept, but really thinking about artists working at the intersection of ecological issues and feminism. I think a lot of the first people to be affected by climate change are women, children, people of color, communities of color. So, you know, ecofeminism can be thought of as a tool. It can be thought of as a tool for survival, an approach to changes that are happening now. Historically, it has roots in, well, the term was coined by a French theorist named Francois de Beaune, who wrote about it in early 1970s, 1974. But really, it was taken up in the early 1980s here in America by anti-nuclear activists. And as soon as those activists kind of were on the ground protesting the meltdown at 9 Mile Island, they were creating artworks as well. So that, I think, is one more art historical origin of ecofeminist art. This is a great piece. This documentation is housed here at the Getty as well by Joyce Cutler Shaw, who collected water samples from every continent on Earth, which I've been told is really hard to do now, like it's illegal. And she created this ice sculpture that melted. She put it on the steps of the UN and it slowly melted. This is a young artist here in LA, Alicia Pillar, who's making these incredibly abstract, beautiful sculptures with kind of salvaged materials from South LA. Liz Larner, longtime LA artist, this piece she's collecting basically the cast-off plastic that her family uses. So she, as the mother, is collecting this trash and turning it into these incredible sculptural pieces. Carolina Caicedo, this is just one of a number of works from a series where she's looking at plant knowledge and kind of other forms of knowledge. And of course, this creates that beautiful feminine bodily shape. Mercedes Doremi is a Tongvan artist here in Los Angeles. This piece was a ceremonial intervention she made with the earth and a photo document of it, which she then left. And this comes back to Francesca's ecofeminist work.
Yeah.
You want to tell us about this one?
Yeah, I'm working with two different collectives. One of them is called Amar Seeds, and it's a work that a friend of mine does, and I'm somehow helping her in realizing visuals. So, you know, her work is really about diffusing knowledge and awareness of the interconnections between soil, plants, life on Earth, and the food we eat. And, you know, she loves the idea of storytelling. And so we came up with this idea of making another messenger, the messenger of memories. And the messenger of memories would be would be wearing a costume that would have all the aromatic plants that would bring memories to you when you see him. So I did help making this costume. I also made a patch that has not been made, but it's a patch made out of moss, or drawing of moss. So that I will do later. But she's also, because she's working with seeds, she's interested in having me help her embroider seeds onto cloth, which I started doing as well. And this is the costume. So it was made. The headpiece, I am not done with it, and I think they did just a hat for now. But yeah, so I did the embroidery. I suggested to do the embroidery on the back, which is the Amar Seed logo, and then all the little pockets for the aromatic plants.
So there's seeds and aromatic herbs
Yeah.
in the plants, and
Yeah.
the herbs being memory triggers, and of
Yeah.
course taking us back to that keeper of memory. And is that the name of this figure?
It's called Il Messaggero dei Ricordi, so it's the messenger of memory, yeah.
Yeah. And he performed, or there was a...
He was
group
just
performance?
walking,
Okay.
yeah, in the festival. There was a festival where Shivana Vandana was there too. And I guess he was just wearing the costume, walking around, talking to people about food. And like, okay, so what does the rosemary bring back in your sense of memory? And they would be like, oh yeah, I use rosemary for this and that. And like, so it was... memory through recipes and history of food, yeah.
And you've collaborated with this group before, and this friend Samantha before. Maybe tell us a bit about your work this summer, and certainly involving your family, both in the film and in that piece.
Yeah, so that brings me to something that we haven't spoken about in the film, and it's the music that I just wanted to mention because it's such an important part of the film. And my partner, my husband Eddie, made the music for the film, so we really collaborated a lot on like how to bring emotions through his own music in the film. So I just want to emphasize how important this music is to me. For this other group where Samantha is also in there, and then her husband and some other musicians, were called Environmental. So we are working around something visual and something musical, but we're just starting, and we went for a week in Corsica in a residency called Providenza that does food, that has their own farm, has a lot of artists coming, a lot of writers, but our sons rehearsed with, and the son of someone else who plays, Nico Becker, who plays the flute. Also his son participated, so I did some spoken poetry, we did a performance, we showed my film, we did a performance. We don't have visuals yet, but I'm kind of working on this idea of visuals, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I love that, going back to kind of the mother as as artist, mother as kind of involving her family, a caretaker of the earth, a caretaker of people, the kind of women's work, and how that really permeates all this kind of ecofeminist thought and philosophy.
Yeah, I think it's important because this is what they're gonna remember. Like, my son Tristan helped me build a little theater for the film, and he was very grumpy and didn't want to do it. And then at the end, a year after, when everything is done and he sees his name, he's like, oh yeah, did it. So that's cool too. Yeah, somehow we're like the caretakers, but we can also make things, yeah.
And you mentioned Vandana Shiva, who is part of this conference, and she's one of the world's foremost ecofeminist scholars. She's a physicist, she's an activist, and kind of a seed rights activist. She kind of talks about the preservation of seeds and this global shift to monoculture and the kind of big business, big agricultural model of wiping out seed diversity, and how she's really advocating for saving the seeds. And so to hear that she was at your conference, I mean, she's like a rock star to me.
She's a total rock star, yeah. I was just listening to a podcast, and she said this thing that is so true. It's like, and I feel that it's such a simple thing, but it's so true. Plants it's not just scientists that are intelligent, Artists have intuition, scientists should have intuition. Plants are intelligent, the soil is intelligent. Like, there is a rhythm to things that we forgot to listen to, we forgot to pay attention. we annihilated that, and we need to go back to that somehow to stay with the trouble.
Yeah, and if you're curious to hear more, I mean, the podcast you sent me, I'm sorry I don't have the name, but she does an incredible job at kind of connecting the eradication of women's knowledge in the 15th century, kind of 8 years before Columbus's voyage where he colonizes the world. But she ties the witch hunts to this eradication of women knowledge and control over the land and kind of autonomy with the land, the commons being shared land and shared resources.
Yeah.
And that the privatization of land really coincides with the witch hunts and persecution of women, and
Yeah.
it's all there. So
Yeah, and you could see that a lot was annihilated, and there's still all systems of oppression kind of follow the same pattern, actually. So it seems like it would be easy to change it because it's the same thing, but it's very difficult to actually, little by little, and I think with families and storytelling and friendship and things like that, that we're gonna make this place a happier place, you know. Yeah, the idea that women, you were talking about that, women and women of color, and of course also men, but really if you look at when, you know, even when women had their gossip and then they didn't have their gossip, but instead of their gossip they had a torture thing that would keep them from talking, you know, and so that was real for, you know, centuries. Yeah.
right, I think I was a bit shocked to hear the figure of 9 million women being murdered, persecuted and murdered during the witch trials, and it really is about that kind of ancestral connection to land and to nature that I think is just now sort of starting to be grappled with afresh and anew.
In our country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to make sure there's time for questions, and if we could open it up for anyone. Don't be shy if you guys have a thought, or yes, we have one here.
Is there any way we could hear some of the music? The music of the film?
Or from your collaboration? Do you have
Oh, from the collaboration. Oh, it was recorded. I don't have it here. Ouch.
Do you have it on your website or anything? Could we direct
I
them?
don't, but I can figure it out. Yeah.
Other thoughts or anything that resonated with you all in the film? Yes. I think you're fine there. We can hear you okay.
How would you compare I heard you mentioned chaos in the ocean, and I think that's the kind of feeling that I got when it was showing the fire, and the music that went along with the fire was chaos and almost an unsettling feeling. What's the difference between the chaos that you find in a fire versus the chaos you find in the water?
Well, I do think they're probably very similar in a way, but when there's a fire, maybe you go to the ocean, you don't go deep in the ocean, but you may just stay by the shore where you can be protected from the fire. I think I didn't film the surfette surfing on a gigantic wave. It was very gentle, and it was almost like a ballet. So it's a possibility to do that as well. But I think that's a good question, because it's true that The ocean is really magical, but it's very fierce. Yeah. So in that sense, the only thing you can do is teach your family how to go in the ocean. You know, learn a little bit about the currents that at the beach that you go to, or how to swim properly, or, you know. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other thoughts, questions? Yes.
Okay, yeah, so it's called Terra Viva with Vandana Shiva. An upstream conversation so Vandana Shiva in conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, and Vandana Shiva has a number of really incredible books with ecofeminism in the title, and her latest book, I think, is called
Oneness. No?
Oneness and the 1%, which specifically looks at big agriculture and the kind of the role that Bill Gates and big tech have in kind of trying to control the world's food supply. So it's also really interesting.
Terra Viva was the food festival where the costume was worn in Italy. Yeah.
It was a wonderful short, really enjoyed it, very artistic, and I was just wondering how you made it and layered it, and also how long did it take to make it?
It took a good 2 years to make, because I didn't have a scenario and I had never really done a film before, so I was kind of like trying this and trying that, and then I had like hours of film, and I needed to have like a story to tell. I really also wanted, this is something I didn't mention before, but I really wanted to work with Bob Baker Marionette Theater, which is a wonderful puppetry theater on York Boulevard in Eagle Rock. Used to be on 2nd Street. I used to take my kids there too. And I made the drawings of the spider, and I had someone make the spider, a marionettist, make the spider for me and teach me remotely how to make it work. Yeah. No, it took a long time. Also, shorten it, try to feel the right time to do the fire, the post-fire, the water. Yeah, and all those animations take a long time to do.
And what film festivals did you?
It got taken to a film festival in Ireland and one in Australia, Canberra, and it got taken to the Getty Museum for a screening. It was really cool.
Are there any other thoughts, questions? We'd love to hear more, your just response to all of this. Yes, in the back.
So I'd like to hear any thoughts you might have about changing where we're headed as a civilization and the planet. Men have had a chance to lead that forever, mess it up, I think I heard back there. And you do a beautiful job, and the conversation was very enlightening about the traditional role of women in sustaining knowledge and fertility and replenishment. It seems likely that eventually humankind, if it survives, will switch and become a matriarchal society, but I don't have a whole lot of hope in the near term. You folks think a lot about that.
There's terror and joy in that thinking.
I mean, there's many answers we could give you. I mean, one being As Bell Hooks said, feminism is for everyone. It's a tool, it's not gendered. Anyone can really embrace feminist ideologies and thought and communal practices as a way for survival, and we might have to. Certainly at the beginning of the lockdown and the pandemic, I think some of those old ways of communicating with your neighbors and really helping each other out had a kind of feminist maybe bent to them. I also think women have to think about the future, and maybe they don't have to, but a lot of them do because they are mothers or looking after people who are another generation. And futurity is I think, a big issue with the climate and the planet and everything we're experiencing.
Yeah, I was just thinking of this book written, Drawing Down the Moon, by Margot Adler, which is the history of witchcraft in the United States. And really, witchcraft, if you want to simplify it, it could be just a connection to nature. So it's very close in that sense to ecofeminism. I feel that in a way. So that's a conversation that can be open and researched. And there's also this, very beautiful book on phenomenology by David Abram called The Spell of the Sensuous, where he really talks about this, our imagination and what we could do with it and what it is. And I think this is all readings or lessons that can help us for the future. And it's like, just like you said, I don't think it's it's a feminine side versus, but it's not just a woman. Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yes, here, sorry. Oh.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to hear you talk a little bit about your choice of materials for your work. I thought it was really interesting that this was a story told from the perspective of the spider, but it's also a story told through paper and works that are made out of paper. And I was just thinking both from the perspective of the vulnerability of paper in fire. There was a part in the film that you could just hear the sound of fire and you're looking at these works, but also in terms of the origin story of paper and its relationship with climate change.
Pulp. Making of paper. I like to use paper because it's somehow it's not considered as precious as a canvas or a painting on a frame. So there's fast idea, sketching, maybe not so precious, but it's actually very fragile, and it's pretty precious. And but I do make a lot of colored washes on it, and after I have 10, 15 sheets of different colors, I see a leaf here or a cloud there, and then I cut through them. Yeah. But I like the idea of using paper. I think there's a little bit of subversion in using paper rather than canvas to, not even in the market. If you go in the money market of pieces, paper things are always going to be cheaper in a way. Why? I don't know, but I kind of like that. Does that answer your question a little bit? Yeah. And I like cutting a lot, so.
And I think we have time for one more question. Yeah, you had one here.
I'm just curious, what was the significance of the spider riding skateboard? Why did you put the skateboard into it?
Well, I mean, it's good to see females skateboarding as well. There's not that many of that. And she's a little feminine being, so I wanted and the skateboard was somehow in my studio, and it looked like a tomb, and it had a spider web under, and I was like, I don't know what this skateboard is doing there, but I'm going to use it.
I mean, yeah, she's this beautiful kind of like conqueror of death and transforms into the woman. It's all about those cycles of transformation. I think it's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I think you're all invited to stay for a reception we're having, so thank you.